What's going on, guys? It's Greg here, aka New York Prepper. In this video, I'm going to test the penetration and power of some popular big bore handgun cartridges. We're going to be shooting these cartridges at some solid concrete blocks, and these blocks are 4 inches thick by 8 inches wide and 16 inches tall. And these are solid concrete blocks. They're not hollow like cinder blocks. I picked these up at my local Home Depot. And we're going to be shooting some 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum, 44 Magnum, and 10mm auto at these solid concrete blocks to see what these cartridges can do to these blocks. And we're going to compare the cartridges and see what kind of damage they did to the blocks. And the ammunition I'm going to be using in this test are some Bear Loads. For the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum, we're going to be using the Buffalo Bore 440 grain hard cast, traveling at 1,625 feet per second and generating close to 2,600 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. For the 44 Magnum, we're going to be using the Underwood Ammo 305 grain hard cast with an advertised velocity of 1,325 feet per second. Now, out of my snub nose 44 Magnum revolver that I'm going to be using in this test, the actual velocity is around 1,125 feet per second. And the ammunition we're going to be using for the 10mm is some Buffalo Bore Heavy Outdoorsman 220 grain hard cast with an advertised velocity of 1,200 feet per second and a muzzle energy of 700 foot-pounds. And the guns I'm going to be using to shoot these loads at the concrete blocks are my Smith & Wesson Model 500 with a 6.5-inch barrel, a Smith & Wesson Model 629 Performance Center 44 Magnum with a 2 5/8-inch barrel, and a Rock Island Armory TAC Ultra 1911 high capacity 10mm with a 5.5-inch barrel. So without further delay, let's begin the test and see what these big bore handgun cartridges can do to the solid concrete blocks. I hope you enjoy the video, and thanks for watching. All right, guys, 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum, Buffalo Bore, 440 grain hard cast, traveling at 1,600 feet per second, 4x8 by 16 inch solid concrete block. Let's see what happens here. Wow. All right, guys, this was the first shot that I took, and I forgot to hit the record button on one of the cameras, and you could see it just broke it apart into chunks. And then this was the second shot where I actually turned my camcorder on, and you can see this huge hole here. Look at that, guys. That is just insane. And I think it just vaporized all the concrete here and just shot it off to the side. But that is just impressive. Look at that, guys. That is just insane. There's my foot. I'm a size 14, so look at the size of that huge hole. That is just insane, guys. Absolutely insane. And look how it just crumpled up this one here into chunks. Very impressive power. All right, guys, so now we got 44 Magnum. This is my Smith & Wesson model 629 Performance Center with a 2 5/8 inch barrel, and we're going to be using an Underwood ammo 305 grain hard cast that has a advertised velocity of 1,300 feet per second, and out of my snub nose 44 I chronographed this at around 1,125 feet per second. So let's see what it does to that solid concrete block. All right, guys, so pretty interesting results with the 44 Magnum. I was expecting the 44 Magnum to break the block, but it did not. And it did knock the block over with a lot of force. As you guys saw in the video, it tossed this block like it was a toy. So definitely a lot of energy, but it didn't have enough energy to break the block. It did go in pretty deep. Okay, you can see here my finger. It's probably about, I don't know, maybe halfway in. Okay, it's a pretty deep hole there. Okay, you can see my finger there. Probably about an inch and a half deep. But left this perfect hole in the block, but did not break it. But just look at the difference between the 44 Magnum and the 500 Magnum. Just look at that, guys. Just a huge difference, okay? The 500 Magnum, for all intents and purposes, is basically a rifle in a handgun. I've said that for many years. You know, the 500 Magnum is basically a rifle cartridge in a handgun. Okay, but look at the difference. It's just absolutely insane. So this was the Underwood ammo 305 grain hard cast bear load. And on the right was the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum Buffalo Bore 440 grain hard cast bear load. And the Underwood 44 Magnum bear load is the deepest penetrating bullet that I've tested out of my 44 Magnum snub nose Smith & Wesson model 629. I'm sure with a longer barrel it might have some difference. Maybe it would have broken the block if I had like a 7 or 8 inch barrel. It might have had enough velocity to break the block. But I lose about 150 feet per second velocity with that snub nose. But that's just a huge difference, guys. You know, 500 Magnum just crumpled up the block into nothing here, as you see, and left this huge hole there. And 44 Magnum really just didn't do much. just a little hole, but still knocked it over with a lot of force. So I'm going to hit this block with the 10mm bear load now, and let's see what the 10mm does. All right, guys, I got a perfect shot right in the middle, and you can see the 10mm much more shallow, not as deep. The hole is not as deep. Okay, you can see my finger here. It's much less deep, but it has a bigger splatter damage, probably because the velocity was a little higher. So more splatter damage with the 10mm, but not as deep in the concrete. And the 44 had less splatter damage, but deeper hole. Okay, you can see my finger here. Okay, you see how deep that hole is. It's quite deep. All right, there's my finger there. You can use my finger as a comparison. Okay, pretty deep. And then the 10mm, much less deep. Okay, so slightly less penetration and power with the 10mm, and as you guys saw in the video, much less force. 10mm hit this block with a lot less force. It didn't throw the block as much as the 44 Magnum did, but you can see a clear difference between the 10mm and the 44. 44 much deeper hole than the 10mm, and the 10mm did more splatter damage. And again, I think that's just because of the velocity, because I'm using that 5.5-inch barrel Rock Island versus a 2 3/4-inch Smith & Wesson 44. So once again, here's the 500 Smith & Wesson on the left, 44 Magnum in the middle, and 10mm on the right. All right, guys, so that concludes this test. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something. As you can see, the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum is in a completely different league than the 44 Magnum and the 10 millimeter. Now, I've always considered the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum to be a rifle cartridge that has been adopted for use in handguns, but for all intents and purposes, the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum, in my opinion, is basically a rifle cartridge. You can actually purchase 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum rifles. They're made by a company called Bighorn Armory. And the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum, when fired out of an 18-inch barrel rifle, can generate 3,800 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, which is actually more powerful than a 4570 with plus P loads. So the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum is basically a rifle cartridge that's being fired out of handguns. Also, the 460 Smith & Wesson, same thing, basically a rifle cartridge. And even the 454 Casull, in my opinion, is borderline rifle cartridge. To me, the 44 Magnum and 357 Magnum and 41 Magnum and even the 10 millimeter auto are true Magnum handgun cartridges because they still use handgun primers, while the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum, 460 Smith & Wesson Magnum, and 454 Casull actually use large rifle primers or Magnum rifle primers. And large rifle primers are what you use in 308 Winchester when you reload for 308 Winchester, and Magnum rifle primers are what you use for cartridges like 300 Win Mag, 7mm Rem Mag, and even 338 Lapua. So that's pretty crazy if you think about it, okay? A 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum is using the same type of primer as a 300 Win Mag or even a 338 Lapua. So I've always considered the 44 Magnum, 41 Magnum, 357 Magnum, and even the 10 millimeter auto to be true Magnum handgun cartridges because they were designed to be fired out of handguns and they still use handgun primers. Now, I believe that with 44 Magnum plus P or high pressure 44 Magnum loads, I probably could have broken the concrete block with one shot. You have to remember I was only using standard pressure 44 Magnum loads. They were not plus P. Also, my revolver only had a 2 5/8 inch barrel, so maybe if I had a 6-inch barrel 44 Magnum revolver, these standard pressure bear loads could have probably broken the concrete block with one shot. And then if we used plus P or high pressure loads, I think it would have definitely broken the concrete block. But you can see the difference between the 10 millimeter and the 44 Magnum. The 10 millimeter is in a completely different class than the 44 Magnum. The 44 Magnum is a significant step up in power from the 10 millimeter because you could see that even with a 2 5/8 inch barrel, the 44 Magnum penetrated noticeably deeper into the concrete than a 10 millimeter with a 5.5 inch barrel. So with the 10 millimeter, I had double the barrel length, but less penetration and less energy than with the 44 Magnum snub nose. So imagine what the 44 Magnum could have done with the same barrel length as the 10 millimeter. So there's no comparison in terms of power and penetration between the 10 millimeter and 44 Magnum. The 44 Magnum is a significant step up from the 10 millimeter, and it is noticeable when you shoot a 44 Magnum and when you shoot a 10 millimeter. You will notice a pretty significant difference in recoil. The 44 Magnum has much more recoil than the 10 millimeter, but still the 10 millimeter was pretty impressive. As you guys saw, it left a pretty big hole in the concrete, and even though it didn't break the concrete, I'm sure with a few shots it would easily break the concrete. I actually shot the 10 millimeter separately at another concrete block, and it only took 2 shots to fracture the concrete block, because once you had the 2 shots, it caused a hairline fracture to connect between them and it broke the block. But so that's it for this test. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you want to see more 500 Magnum, 44 Magnum, and 10 millimeter penetration tests and ballistics tests, you can check out my playlists. I have playlists for all these cartridges, so browse through the playlists. I'm sure you'll find something you like. But that's all I got for now, so take care, God bless, and don't forget the 3 Ps. Prepare, practice, and persevere.